Chapter 1. The pavement was the only thing that never lied to Elara. At 5 in the morning, the air in Seattle was a damp shroud, smelling of salt and gasoline, the perfect mask for a girl who didn't want to be scented. She checked her watch, her heart rate a steady human 50 beats per minute. To the world, she was Elara Vance, the miracle mile runner who had come out of nowhere to shatter national records. To the shadows, she was a ghost. She started her sprint. Every muscle moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency that she spent most of her life trying to dull. As a child, her mother had whispered the same prayer every night. Be slow, Elara. Be clumsy. Be nothing. But the wolf in her blood didn't know how to be small. It wanted the horizon. As she crested the hill, her lungs burned with a pleasant fire. She wasn't just running for a medal. She was running from the memory of a pack house in flames and the cold realization that omegas were only kept as long as they were useful. 3,000 miles away, in a room that smelled of cedar and old power, Soren shifted in his leather chair. The television was muted, showing highlights of the Boston Marathon. He was a man who saw the world in frequencies, the vibration of lies, the hum of true intent. He had no interest in human sports until a blur of dark hair and lean muscle flashed across the screen. He froze. The way she took the corner wasn't human. It wasn't the mechanical drive of an athlete. It was the predatory grace of a hunter who had forgotten she was the one being hunted. Soren leaned forward, his amber eyes catching the light. He was the Alpha of the Blackwood Ridge. A man known for a ruthlessness that kept the peace, but his hearth was empty. He didn't see a mate in the girl on the screen. He saw a transgression, a shifter living in the open, flaunting their nature in front of millions of humans, was a death sentence waiting to happen. But as he watched her cross the finish line, seeing the profound loneliness in her eyes even as the crowd roared, something in his chest, long dormant and encased in ice, began to thaw. He didn't call his enforcers. He didn't call his beta. He simply picked up his keys. Find out where she trains, he murmured to the empty room. She's going to trip, and I want to be there before the council sees her fall. Back in Seattle, Elara felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the rain. She stopped under a flickering streetlight, her ears twitching toward a sound miles away. The wind had changed. It no longer tasted of salt. It tasted of mountain air, ancient pine, and a storm that had been brewing for 15 years. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew the feeling of a predator's gaze. She tightened her laces, pushed her hair back, and ran faster than she ever had before, unaware that she was running straight into the arms of the one man who could either save her or hand her back to the monsters of her past. Chapter 2. The transition from the city to the backcountry was supposed to be Elara's sanctuary, but the Olympic Peninsula felt like a cage the moment she stepped onto the trail. She had fled Seattle hours after the race, sensing the atmospheric shift that usually preceded a disaster. Here, among the moss-draped hemlocks and the suffocating silence of the old-growth forest, she expected to find peace. Instead, she found a scent, heavy, dark, and intoxicatingly dangerous. It smelled of ozone and crushed velvet. She was 5 miles into a steep ascent when she saw him. He wasn't hiding. He was leaning against a jagged outcrop of rock, dressed in charcoal hiking gear that looked far too expensive for the rugged terrain. He looked less like a hiker and more like the mountain itself had taken human form. His presence was a physical weight, an alpha pulse so thick it made her inner wolf want to drop to its knees and expose its throat. Elara did the opposite. She skidded to a halt, her fingers curling into claws, her eyes flashing a dangerous, iridescent amber before she forced the human mask back into place. "Ash, you're trespassing," she said, her voice a low, raspy blade. "I could say the same to you, Elara Vance," Soren replied. His voice was a rich baritone that seemed to vibrate in her very marrow. He stepped forward, and the shadows moved with him. Though Vance is a lovely sentiment, I imagine the council prefers the name your mother gave you before the Silver Ridge Pack was raised. The blood drained from Elara's face. She didn't think. She moved. She launched herself off the trail, diving into the dense underbrush with a speed that would have been a blur to any human eye. She shifted mid-air, a painful, practiced explosion of bone and fur, her clothes tearing away as a sleek, silver-white wolf hit the forest floor and bolted. She didn't care about the cold or the branches catching her pelt. She only cared about distance. But Soren was not a man of half measures. He didn't shift. He ran as a man fueled by an alpha's primordial strength, cutting through the switchbacks with terrifying precision. He wasn't chasing her to catch her, he was herding her. Every time she tried to veer toward the highway, he was there, a dark silhouette forcing her deeper into the high country. Finally, she reached a box canyon, the roar of a waterfall cutting off her escape. She spun around, fur bristling, a low, guttural snarl ripping from her chest. Soren stopped 10 feet away. He held up his hands, palms open. He looked entirely unruffled, his expression one of somber curiosity rather than aggression. "I'm not here to take you back to them," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "The Silver Ridge survivors have been looking for you for a decade, Elara. Not to welcome you, but to silence the last witness of their shame. You think you're disappearing in plain sight? You're a beacon. Every time you break a record, you're screaming your location to every hunter in the hemisphere." Elara let out a sharp bark of disbelief, her muscles coiled to spring. "I'm offering you a deal," Soren continued, stepping closer despite her warning growl. "My territory is Blackwood Ridge. It is the only place the council cannot reach without my permission. Come with me. I'll give you a home, a name that isn't a lie, and a pack that doesn't care who your mother was. In exchange, you stop running. You let me protect the girl who thinks she has to outrun the world." He reached out a hand, and for a split second the wind died down. The scent of him, the cedar and the storm washed over her, grounding the frantic, a vibrating fear in her chest. For the first time in 15 years, Elara felt something other than the urge to flee. She felt a spark of terrifying, undeniable warmth. She didn't shift back, but she lowered her head, her silver ears flattening. She was tired, so incredibly tired of being a ghost. Soren saw the change in her posture, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips, a look of pure predatory satisfaction, softened by something that looked hauntingly like tenderness. "Good," he whispered. "The run is over, Elara. Let's go home." Chapter 3. Blackwood Ridge was not the primitive collection of dens Elara had expected. It was a fortress of glass and timber, perched precariously on the spine of the Cascades, where the clouds seemed to get caught in the rafters. Soren's home sat at the highest peak, and a sprawling architectural marvel that looked out over thousands of acres of untouched wilderness. As they arrived in the dead of night, Elara sat stiffly in the passenger seat of his SUV, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket he'd pulled from the back. She felt raw, her skin humming with the aftershocks of a mid-run shift, but more than that, she felt exposed. "You're vibrating," Soren said softly, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. He didn't look at her, but she could feel his focus, a steady, warm pressure against her senses. "The wards here are keyed to my blood. Once you step over the threshold, your scent will be masked by the mountain's own mineral pulse. You'll be invisible." "Nowhere is invisible," Elara retorted, her voice still raspy. "I've lived in basements, in vans, in crowded marathons. Someone always smells the wolf. Someone always remembers the face of the tainted Omega." Soren stopped the car and turned to her. In the dim light of the dashboard, his features were carved from shadow. "You are not your mother's disgrace, Elara. And in Blackwood, we don't use those labels. You are a runner, you are a guest. And if you choose, you are part of this ridge." He led her inside, but he didn't put her in a guest room. He led her to a wing that smelled of fresh linen and rain-dampened earth. There was a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out onto a private trail winding into the mist. "This is yours," he said. "The door doesn't lock from the outside. You can leave whenever you want, but I suspect you'll find the air here easier to breathe." For the first 3 days, Elara didn't leave the room. She watched from the window as the pack lived. It wasn't like the Silver Ridge pack of her youth, where hierarchy was enforced with bared teeth and bowed heads. Here she saw shifters gardening, children racing through the trees in half shifts, and a sense of communal peace that felt like a foreign language. Soren was always there, a dark sun around which the pack orbited, but he never summoned her. He brought her meals himself, leaving them at the door with a single sharp knock that felt more like a heartbeat than a demand. On the 4th night, the walls felt too small. Her wolf was pacing, frustrated by the luxury, craving the bite of the wind. She slipped out of her window barefoot and dressed in leggings and a thin shirt. She didn't shift. She wanted to feel the earth beneath her human feet. She began to run, her pace easy at first, then accelerating as she hit the pine needle carpet of the forest. She thought she was alone until she reached the overlook, a jagged cliff that hung over a silver-blue lake. Soren was there, standing at the very edge, his shirt discarded despite the freezing mountain air. His back was a map of old scars, jagged lines that spoke of a history as violent as her own. "I thought you might come here," he said without turning. "The moonlight hits the water at this angle and creates a path. My father used to tell me it was the trail to the first Alpha's hunting grounds." Elara stopped a few feet behind him, her breath hitching. "You have scars," she whispered, the words out before she could stop them. Soren turned, his eyes glowing with a soft, predatory light. "I wasn't born an Alpha, Elara. And I had to take this ridge from a man who thought strength was measured in fear. I earned every inch of this peace." He stepped toward her, the heat radiating off his body like a furnace. "You've spent your life running from things. Have you ever tried running with someone?" He held out a hand, an invitation that felt like a challenge. Elara looked at his hand, then at the moon-drenched trail ahead. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't feel the urge to bolt into the dark alone. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, unadulterated power that made the air around them shimmer. "Show me your mountain, Soren," she said, her voice steady. They ran, not as predator and prey, but as two shadows cutting through the moonlight. Soren matched her pace effortlessly, his stride long and powerful, his presence a protective shadow at her shoulder. For miles there was only the sound of their synchronized breathing and the rhythmic thud of feet on earth. They weren't just moving through the forest, they were claiming it. But as they reached the highest ridge, a low, discordant howl echoed from the valley below, a sound that didn't belong to the Blackwood pack. It was a cold, sharp note that tasted of old blood and silver. Soren skidded to a halt, his body instantly tensing, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent on the wind. "The Council's trackers," he growled, his hand instinctively moving to shield Elara. "They're early. And they aren't here for a talk." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, the old terror clawing at her throat. But when she looked at Soren, she didn't see the cold Alpha she'd met on the trail. She saw a man who looked ready to burn the world down to keep her safe. The suspense of her past had finally caught up to the present, and the quiet peace of the mountain was about to be shattered. Chapter 4. The discordant howl lingered in the air like a stain, vibrating through the soles of Elara's feet. It was a sound she hadn't heard since she was 9 years old, the hollow call, used by the High Council's enforcers to signal a hunt. It was designed to paralyze, to trigger the primal fear of the rogue. But as she stood on the precipice next to Soren, the paralysis didn't take hold. Instead, she felt a hot, bright spark of fury. Soren's entire demeanor shifted. The gentle companion of the moonlight was gone, replaced by the ruthless Alpha who had carved a kingdom out of chaos. And he stepped in front of her, his shadow swallowing her whole. His scent changed, the cedar sharpening into the metallic tang of a gathering storm. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice vibrating with a frequency that made the very trees seem to lean away. "I'm not a pup to be hidden, Soren," Elara hissed, though she didn't move away from his warmth. "They're here because of me. If I leave now, I can lead them away from your people." Soren turned, grabbing her shoulders with hands that were firm but not bruising. His eyes were no longer amber. They were swirling pits of molten gold. "Listen to me very carefully. You are in Blackwood now. My people are your people. We do not throw our own to the wolves, even if they are wolves." He looked toward the tree line where the shadows were beginning to detach themselves from the trunks. "They aren't just trackers. Those are the carrion seekers. They don't arrest, they erase." 3 figures emerged from the mist at the edge of the clearing. They were dressed in tactical gear, but their movements were fluid, wrong for humans. They carried silver-tipped crossbows and long, thin blades etched with runes that glowed with a faint, sickly violet light. The leader, a man with a face like etched stone and eyes that held no light, stepped forward. "Alpha Soren," the leader said, his voice a dry rasp. "You are harboring a fugitive. Elara of the Silver Ridge, a carrier of the tainted line. Hand her over, and we will leave your borders without blood being spilled." Soren didn't even blink. He stepped forward, his posture relaxed, which Elara knew was his most dangerous state. "You're a long way from the council's marble halls. For Kalen, and you're standing on my dirt. My borders don't open for carrion." "She is a violation of the masquerade," Kalen countered, gesturing to the air where Elara's race had been televised. "She's a risk to us all. The council has ordered her extraction and sterilization of the threat." The word sterilization hit Elara like a physical blow. They didn't just want her dead, they wanted to ensure her tainted bloodline ended with her, just as they had tried to do with her mother. The wolf inside her surged, a silver fire that burned away the last of her human hesitation. She stepped out from behind Soren, her eyes glowing with a ferocity that startled even the Seekers. "I ran for 15 years, she said, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I ran until my lungs bled and my feet gave out. I ran to keep you from finding me. But I'm done running." The fight was a blur of silver and shadow. Kalen fired a bolt, but Soren was faster. He didn't shift fully. He used a partial transformation, claws lengthening, strength doubling, as he caught the bolt out of the air and snapped it like a toothpick. Elara didn't wait for a second shot. She moved with the world record speed that had made her famous, but now it was weaponized. She was a streak of light, diving low, sweeping the legs of the second seeker before he could draw his blade. She was a dancer in a storm of violence. She didn't have the brute strength of an alpha, but she had the momentum of a landslide. She used the seeker's own weight against them, a blur of strikes that left them gasping. But these were seasoned killers. The third seeker managed to nick her arm with a silver-edged knife. The pain was instant and agonizing, like liquid fire pouring into her veins. Elara stumbled, her vision blurring. Soren roared, a sound that shook the very foundation of the ridge. He shifted completely this time, a massive midnight black wolf that seemed to block out the moon. He was a hurricane of fur and teeth, tossing the seekers aside like ragdolls. He didn't kill them, that would mean war with the council, but he broke them enough that they wouldn't be standing for a long time. As the last seeker collapsed, Soren shifted back, lunging to catch Elara before she hit the ground. The silver poison was moving fast, tracing black veins up her arm. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice cracking with a desperation she hadn't expected. He pressed his hand over the wound, his own alpha energy flooding into her to combat the silver. "Oh, I've got you, Elara, I've got you." As she drifted into a pained unconsciousness, she realized the terrifying truth. The Seekers weren't the real danger. The real danger was that for the first time in her life, she had found something worth staying for, and the world was already trying to tear it away. Chapter 5. The air in the infirmary was thick with the scent of dried sage and something clinical that couldn't quite mask the heavy underlying musk of alpha power. Elara woke with a gasp, her body jerking against the silk sheets. Her left arm felt as though it had been dipped in molten lead, the skin tight and throbbing. Before she could spiral into a panic, a heavy, warm hand settled on her shoulder, grounding her. "Easy, little bird." Soren's voice was a low vibration in the dim light. He was sitting in a chair pulled close to the bed. His shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. His eyes were bloodshot, the amber darkened to the colour of old whiskey. "The silver is out. Our healer spent the night drawing the toxin into a charcoal poultice. You're going to be sore, but you're alive." Elara looked down at her arm. A thick bandage wrapped from her wrist to her elbow, but the black veins that had been creeping toward her heart were gone. She looked at Soren, seeing the exhaustion etched into the lines around his mouth. "How long?" "2 days," he said, his voice sandpaper rough. "The Seekers are gone. I had my sentries dump them at the border of the neutral zone with a message. The next time they cross into Blackwood, they don't go back to the Council in one piece." "You started a war for me," Elara whispered, the weight of it settling in her chest. "They won't let this go. The Council, they have a long memory, Soren. My mother used to say they are like the glaciers, slow, cold, and they crush everything in their path." Soren stood, moving to the window that overlooked the misty valley. "Let them come. I've spent my life preparing for a fight that matters. Running a pack is about more than just borders and hunting rights, Elara. It's about sanctuary." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "But there's something you need to know. Kalen, the leader, he said something before he passed out. He didn't just call you a tainted line. He called you the key of the Silver Ridge." Elara froze. The name hit her like a physical blow, dredging up a memory she had buried under layers of survival instinct. She remembered her mother, frantic and bleeding, handing her a jagged piece of obsidian on a leather cord just before she was shoved into the crawl space. "Keep it hidden, Elara. As long as they don't have the stone, they can't open the vault." "The vault," Elara breathed, her voice barely audible. "My mother wasn't just a disgraced Omega. She was the keeper. The Silver Ridge Pack didn't just collapse because of internal fighting. They were guarding something the Council wanted, something that only our bloodline can unlock." Soren crossed the room in 2 strides, crouching by her bed so they were eye to eye. "The Council isn't hunting you because you're a shifter on TV, Elara. They're hunting you because you're the only person left who can give them whatever is buried under that mountain. And if that's true, they won't just send trackers next time. They'll send an army." The silence that followed was heavy with the realization of what they were up against, but in the quiet, a different kind of tension began to simmer. Elara reached out, her uninjured hand trembling slightly as she touched the edge of Soren's jaw. The stubble was rough against her skin, a reminder of the 2 days he'd spent watching over her. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk your pack for a woman you barely know, for a runner you saw on a screen?" Soren didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his eyes searching hers, with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Because when I saw you running, I didn't see a shifter or a world record. I saw a soul that was as lonely as mine. I've spent my life surrounded by people, Elara, but I've been alone since the day I took the mantle. When you arrived, the mountain felt full." He moved closer, his breath warm against her lips. It wasn't an Alpha's claim. It was a question. Elara closed the distance, her mouth meeting his in a kiss that tasted of salt, ginger, and a desperate burgeoning hope. It was a slow burn, a gentle collision of two people who had spent their lives braced for impact. In that moment, the Council and the deadly secrets of the Silver Ridge felt a world away. The moment was shattered by a frantic knock on the door. Soren's beta, a tall woman named Mara, stepped in, her face pale. Alpha, the perimeter at the South Pass has been breached, but it's not the Council, it's a woman. She's badly injured, and she keeps calling for Elara. Elara sat bolt upright, her heart hammering. My mother is dead, she said, more to herself than them. I saw the house burn. I saw it. She's not your mother, Mara said, looking at Elara with a mix of pity and fear. She says she's your sister, and she says the Council has already found the vault. Chapter 6. The air in the room turned to ice. Elara's mind raced through the blurred memories of her childhood. The smoke, the screaming, and the small, crying bundle her mother had handed to a stranger in the woods before turning back toward the flames. She had been told everyone was gone. To survive, she had believed it. I don't have a sister, Elara whispered, even as her body betrayed her, her wolf pacing frantically behind her ribs. Soren was already on his feet, his alpha aura snapping back into place like a suit of armor. Bring her to the Great Hall, he commanded Mara. He turned to Elara, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. Can you walk? I can run, she said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The pain in her arm was a dull throb now, eclipsed by the adrenaline spiking in her veins. When they entered the Great Hall, the sight was a visceral punch. A young woman, perhaps 19, lay on a stone bench by the fire. She was covered in the grey dust of the high-altitude quarries, her clothes tattered and soaked in dark, old blood. But it was her face that stopped Elara's heart. It was a mirror of her own, the same high cheekbones, the same slight tilt to the eyes. The girl's eyes fluttered open as Elara approached. Elara, she croaked, a small, trembling hand reaching out. They said you were the one on the news. I didn't believe it. I thought I was the last one. Who are you? Elara asked, kneeling beside her, her voice trembling. Mum, my name is Lyra, the girl whispered. Mother hid me with a human family in the valley, but the Council, they tracked the scent. They've been using me, Elara. They used my blood to try and trick the vault, but it didn't work. The lock, it needs the firstborn. It needs the runner. Soren stood behind Elara, a silent, towering sentinel. What is in that vault, Lyra? Why is the Council willing to risk a pack war for it? Lyra's breath hitched, a wet, rattling sound. It's not gold or weapons. It's the primal strain, the original bloodline that allows a shifter to walk between forms without the moon or the pain. The Council is losing their power. Their children are being born human. They want the strain to force a new era of dominance. If they get it, they won't just rule the packs. Or they'll hunt the humans until there's nothing left. Elara felt a cold dread settle in her marrow. The obsidian stone she had carried for years, the one she had eventually hidden inside the lining of her favourite running shoes, wasn't just a memento. It was the physical key to a biological nightmare. They're coming here, Lyra gasped, clutching Elara's hand with surprising strength. They let me escape. I realise it now. They knew I'd find you. They're using me as a compass. As if on cue, the heavy timber doors of the hall groaned. A low, rhythmic thumping began to vibrate through the floorboards, the sound of boots, hundreds of them, marching in perfect unison. Outside, the night sky was suddenly illuminated by the harsh, artificial glare of spotlights from hovering helicopters. Soren looked at Mara. Sound the horn. Total lockdown. And get the young and the elders into the tunnels. He turned to Elara, his expression one of fierce, protective resolve. They want the key, Elara. But they have to go through the mountain to get it. No, Elara said, standing up, her eyes burning with a new, dangerous light. They don't want the mountains, Soren. They want me. If we stay here, your pack dies. If I run, I can draw them to the Silver Ridge ruins. It's my mountain. I know the tunnels better than their satellites do. You aren't doing this alone, Soren growled, stepping into her space. I told you the run is over. If we go to the ruins, we go together. We fight as one pack. The windows of the hall shattered as a flashbang grenade detonated on the terrace. Through the smoke and the ringing in her ears, Elara saw Soren shift, not into the wolf, but into something more ancient, his skin shimmering with the raw power of a king. He grabbed her hand, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a fugitive. She felt like a general. Mara, take Lyra to the healers, Soren roared over the sound of the approaching rotors. Elara, move. They dived through the shattered window just as the first wave of council enforcers breached the hall. The air was filled with the scent of cordite and pine. Side by side, the Alpha and the runner disappeared into the dark, heading toward the one place Elara had sworn never to return to. The graveyard of her past. Chapter 7. The drive toward the Silver Ridge was a blur of high-speed maneuvers and suffocating tension. Soren pushed the SUV through logging roads that hadn't seen a tyre in a decade, the vehicle groaning as it bounced over washouts. Seen behind them, the sky was etched with the searchlights of 3 council helicopters, their rotors thrumming like the heartbeat of a giant. The ruins are 5 miles past the gorge, Elara shouted over the roar of the engine. She was clutching the obsidian stone, which she'd retrieved from its hiding place. It felt warm against her palm, pulsing in time with her own frantic pulse. There's a cave system that leads to the lower levels of the old pack house. If we can get inside, their thermal imaging won't be able to track us through the limestone. Soren glanced at her, his jaw set in a hard line. And once we're inside, if your sister is right, your blood is the final tumbler. If they catch you in that vault, they don't even need your consent. They just need your life. They won't catch me, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. The SUV suddenly lurched as a precision-guided tranquilizer dart slammed into the rear tyre. The vehicle spun, tyres screaming against the gravel before sliding sideways into a thicket of fir trees. Before the dust could settle, Soren was out of the door, ripping Elara's door open and pulling her into the shadows just as a spotlight swept over the wreckage. Run, Soren commanded. They didn't shift. Shifting would make them larger targets for the snipers above. They ran as humans, pushed to the absolute limit of their physiology. Elara led the way, her runner's lungs finally finding their true purpose. She navigated the treacherous terrain by memory, her feet finding the hidden paths she had memorized as a terrified child. They reached the gorge, a narrow, terrifying bridge of fallen timber slick with moss. Below, the river was a churning white monster. Elara didn't hesitate. She leapt across the gaps with a grace that made Soren marvel even in the heat of battle. But as Soren landed behind her, a shadow dropped from the canopy above. It was Kalen. He had survived the encounter at the ridge, his face now a mask of bruised purple and stitched skin. He didn't use a weapon this time. He shifted mid-air, a massive grey wolf with yellow eyes full of fanatical light. He slammed into Soren, and the 2 alphas tumbled toward the edge of the ravine. "Soren!" Elara screamed. She moved to help, but 2 more enforcers emerged from the brush, their silver-tipped spears levelled at her chest. "The key, Elara!" one of the enforcers sneered. "Hand it over, and we might let the Alpha live long enough to watch us change the world." Elara looked at Soren. He was locked in a life-or-death struggle with Kalen, their snarls echoing off the canyon walls. He looked at her, his eyes screaming for her to leave him. In that moment, Elara realized that the Council expected her to be an Omega, to be a victim who either surrendered or fled. They didn't expect a woman who had spent 15 years mastering her own body. She didn't hand over the stone. She tucked it into her sports bra, centered her weight, and smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression. "You want the runner?" she whispered. "Catch me." She didn't run away. She ran at them. She used a low-profile slide, kicking the feet out from under the first enforcer, then used her momentum to vault off his back, driving her knee into the second man's chin. As they scrambled to recover, she pivoted and launched herself into the fray between the alphas. She didn't have the weight to fight Kaelin, but she had the precision. She drove her thumb into a pressure point on the grey wolf's neck, a trick her mother had taught her for subduing aggressive males. Kaelin's grip loosened for a split second. It was all Soren needed. He threw the grey wolf off him, sending Kaelin crashing into a granite outcrop. Soren stood, heaving, his chest covered in gashes. He grabbed Elara's hand, his grip bruising. The cave. Now! They dove into the mouth of the Silver Ridge caverns just as the helicopters began a saturation sweep of the forest with infrared lasers. The darkness swallowed them, the air turning cold and smelling of ancient, stagnant water. Elara led him deeper, through narrow squeezes and over subterranean ledges, until they reached a door made of solid, seamless ironwood, etched with the crest of a wolf and a running girl. Elara pressed the obsidian stone into a circular indentation in the center of the door. Nothing happened for a heartbeat. Then, she felt a sharp prick in her palm. The door wasn't just checking the stone, it was tasting her. With a groan of ancient gears, the vault began to open. But as the seal broke, a voice echoed from the tunnel behind them, smooth, cultured, and utterly terrifying. "Thank you, Elara," said the High Chancellor of the Council, stepping out of the shadows with a small army behind him. "We've been waiting a long time for a Vance to come home." Chapter 8. The ironwood door didn't just swing open, it exhaled. A rush of pressurized ancient air swept past Elara and Soren, smelling of ozone and the deep, a metallic tang of the earth's marrow. Beyond the threshold lay a chamber that defied the decay of the ruins above. It was a cathedral of bioluminescent fungi and polished obsidian, centered around a single glowing vial encased in a pillar of translucent quartz. "The primal strain," the Chancellor whispered, stepping into the light. He was a thin, elegant man with silver hair and eyes that looked like dead moons. He didn't look like a monster, which made the coldness of his scent all the more terrifying. He gestured to the dozen enforcers flanking him, their weapons trained on Soren's heart. A legacy wasted on a pack of mountain dwellers and a girl who spent her life pretending to be a human athlete. Soren stepped in front of Elara, his body a shield of bruised muscle. "You're too late, Chancellor. The world has moved on from your pure bloodlines. You aren't trying to save the shifters, you're trying to build a cage for them." The Chancellor smiled, a thin, bloodless line. "Evolution requires a firm hand, Alpha. Our kind is fading into the human gene pool, becoming soft. Elara here is the proof. She has the gift of the first ones, and she used it to win plastic trophies and Nike sponsorships." He turned his gaze to Elara. "Step away from him, child. Give me the vial, and I will let your sister live. Yes, we still have Lyra. The girl at your ridge was merely a shadow clone, a piece of shifting magic to lure you here. The real Lyra is in my custody." Elara felt the world tilt. The girl she had seen, the blood, the tears, was a lie. A lure. The cruelty of the Council knew no bounds. She looked at the quartz pillar, then at Soren. She saw the minute twitch in his hand, the way he was calculating the distance between him and the nearest guard. He was going to die for her. He was going to let them kill him just to give her a 5-second head start. "I won't let you have it," Elara said, her voice dropping to a low, steady frequency that resonated with the stone of the vault. "You have no choice," the Chancellor replied. "The vault is open. The strain is mine." "The vault isn't a locker, you fool," Elara hissed. She stepped out from behind Soren, her eyes no longer amber, but a brilliant, terrifying white. The obsidian stone in her hand began to glow, responding to the proximity of the vial. "It's a furnace. My mother didn't protect this because it was a gift. She protected it because it's a curse. It's too much power for one soul. It burns whatever it touches." In a move that caught even Soren off guard, Elara didn't reach for the vial. She reached for the base of the pillar, where a small recessed lever was hidden beneath a carving of a running wolf. She slammed her palm onto it, her blood from the door's prick acting as a final authorization. The chamber began to shake. A low, subterranean groan vibrated through the floorboards of the mountain. "What are you doing?" the Chancellor screamed, his composure shattering. "I'm finishing the race," Elara said. She grabbed the vial, but she didn't hand it over. She sprinted, not toward the exit, but toward the back of the chamber where a narrow fissure led deeper into the mountain's volcanic vents. Soren moved instantly, his instincts synchronized with hers. He launched himself at the Chancellor, and a whirlwind of teeth and claws creating a wall of chaos that blocked the Enforcer's path. "Go!" Soren roared, his voice echoing through the collapsing chamber. Elara didn't look back. She ran into the dark, the vial pulsing like a dying star against her chest. She could hear the Enforcers behind her, the clatter of boots and the bark of orders. But she also heard something else, the mountain itself waking up. The key hadn't just opened the door. It had triggered a self-destruct sequence designed centuries ago to ensure the primal strain never fell into the wrong hands. She reached a ledge overlooking a river of molten rock, the heat singeing her eyebrows. This was it. The end of the line. She turned, the vial held high over the abyss. The Chancellor skidded to a halt 20 feet away, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated greed. "Give it to me, and I can save your Alpha!" he cried out over the roar of the lava. Elara looked past him. Soren was there, held back by 4 men, his face covered in blood, his eyes locked on hers. He wasn't begging her to save him. He was nodding. A silent, heartbreaking command. "Do it." "The runner never stops, Chancellor," Elara whispered. "She just changes direction." She let the vial drop. As the glass shattered against the magma, a shockwave of pure white energy exploded outward. It wasn't fire. It was a pulse of raw, genetic memory. It hit everyone in the room, a wave of light that felt like 1,000 years of history passing through their marrow. And then, the ceiling came down. Chapter 9. The world didn't end in fire. It ended in a deafening crystalline silence. When the white light of the primal strain dissipated, the vault was a tomb of dust and jagged shadows. Elara blinked, her vision swimming with fractured colours. The air was thick with pulverised stone, making every breath a battle. She was buried waist-deep in rubble, her legs pinned by a fallen obsidian slab. "Soren?" She coughed, her voice a fragile thread in the dark. A few yards away, a pile of rocks shifted. A bloodied hand emerged, followed by the jagged, ragged breath of a man who had stared into the sun and survived. Soren hauled himself upright, his clothes shredded, his skin etched with the white-hot scars of the energy pulse. He looked different. His presence no longer felt like a crushing weight, but like a deep, resonant hum. The pulse hadn't stripped them of their nature. It had balanced it. He crawled toward her, and his movements fueled by pure, desperate willpower. "I'm here," he rasped, his hands clawing at the debris trapping her. "I've got you, Elara." But they weren't alone. From the wreckage near the lava vent, a figure rose like a ghost from a nightmare. The Chancellor's face was half gone, the skin seared away to reveal the bone beneath. The pulse had hit him hardest, rejecting the corruption in his blood. He held a jagged shard of the quartz pillar, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on Elara with a zealot's madness. "You destroyed." The future, the Chancellor hissed, his voice a wet rattle. He lunged, not with the grace of a shifter, but with the frantic clumsiness of a dying man. Soren intercepted him mid-air. There was no grand speech, no mercy. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. With a strength that felt ancient and grounded, he caught the Chancellor's wrist and twisted. The quartz shard fell into the abyss. With a final guttural roar, Soren threw the man back into the shadows of the collapsing cavern. The mountain groaned again, a final warning. "The tunnels are collapsing," Soren said, his voice urgent as he finally wrenched the slab off Elara's legs. He pulled her up, her limbs feeling like lead. "We have to run, one last time." "I can't," Elara whispered, her knees buckling. "The pulse. It took something from me, Soren. The wolf. She's quiet." Soren caught her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering heat. "She's not gone, Elara. She's finally at peace. And if you can't run, I'll carry you. We don't leave our own." They moved through the crumbling labyrinth as the Silver Ridge ruins began to fold in on themselves. The helicopters were gone, as scattered by the atmospheric surge of the explosion. Outside, the pre-dawn sky was a bruised purple, and the air tasted of the first snow of winter. They reached the tree line just as the entrance to the vault vanished under 1,000,000 tons of granite. The Silver Ridge was gone, the secrets, the tainted bloodlines, and the Council's leverage all buried forever. Elara leaned against a cedar tree, watching the dust settle. For the first time in 25 years, the frantic, vibrating run in her soul had stopped. She looked at Soren, who was watching the horizon, his silhouette carved against the rising sun. "What now?" she asked. Soren turned to her. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, cleaning away the soot and blood. "Now, we find your sister, the real Lyra. And then, we show this world what a pack looks like when it isn't built on fear." He paused, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his exhaustion. "But first, Elara Vance, I think you've earned a rest." As they stood on the edge of the decimated mountain, a single howl echoed from the valley below. It wasn't the hollow call of the Council. It was Mara and the Blackwood sentries, signalling the way home. But as Elara took a step forward, she felt a sharp, icy tingle at the base of her spine. She turned back to the ruins. Amidst the settling dust, a small silver fox, bright as a new coin, sat atop a rock, watching her. Its eyes were the same iridescent amber as hers. It tilted its head, then vanished into the mist. "It's not over," Elara whispered. "No," Soren agreed, pulling her close. "It's just the beginning." Chapter 10. The healing at Blackwood Ridge was not measured in days, but in the quiet victories of a life lived without shadows. 6 months had passed since the Silver Ridge collapsed. The High Council had been decimated, not by war, but by the loss of their greatest weapon. Without the primal strain, their influence over the smaller packs withered, leaving room for a new kind of leadership to rise. Elara stood on the balcony of Soren's home, watching the first light of spring touch the peaks. She wore a simple running jersey, her skin glowing with health rather than the frantic sheen of survival. Her arm bore a thin, silvery scar where the poison had once taken root, a badge of honor rather than a mark of shame. "You're thinking about the fox again," a voice rumbled behind her. Soren stepped onto the balcony, wrapping his arms around her waist. He had traded his tactical gear for a soft sweater, though the power radiating from him was more potent than ever. He had become the de facto leader of the Northern Territories, but in this house he was simply hers. "It wasn't a hallucination, Soren," Elara said, leaning back into his heat. "The strain didn't just explode. It merged. I feel it every time I run. It's not just a wolf anymore. It's the mountain, the wind, the earth. Everything feels connected." I know, he whispered, kissing the top of her head. The pack feels it too. The children are born stronger. The elders are finding their feet again. You didn't destroy our legacy, Elara. You purified it. The sound of laughter drifted up from the courtyard below. Lyra, or the real Lyra, rescued from a council-holding cell weeks after the explosion, was racing a group of young pups. She was healthy, her eyes bright with the same defiant spark that defined the Vance bloodline. She looked up and waved, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated joy that always brought a lump to Elara's throat. She's happy, Soren noted. And you? Are you still looking for the next finish line? Elara turned in his arms, her hands sliding up to rest on his shoulders. The man who had once been a ruthless stranger was now her anchor. Their love hadn't been a sudden spark, but a slow moulding of two broken pieces into a single unbreakable whole. I'm done with finish lines, she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes, but I did hear there's a trail on the north face that no one has managed to map yet. Something about a cave that breathes. Soren laughed, the sound deep and rich. Always looking for a challenge. I suppose I'll have to come with you to make sure the mountain doesn't try to claim you again. Try and keep up, Alpha, she teased. They set off together, two blurs of motion against the green and grey of the Cascades. They ran past the sentries, past the gardens, and into the deep, wild heart of the ridge. There were no cameras here, no world records to break, and no hunters in the trees. There was only the steady rhythm of their breathing and the synchronized thud of their hearts. As they reached the summit, Elara stopped. Below them the world stretched out in an endless tapestry of possibility. She realized then that her mother had been right to make her run, but Soren had been right to make her stay. Or the strength to flee was a survival tactic, but the strength to belong was a revolution. A flash of silver caught her eye in the brush. A small, familiar fox watching them from the shade of a hemlock. It didn't flee this time. It gave a short, playful yip and vanished into the undergrowth. Elara took Soren's hand, her fingers interlacing with his. The long-distance runner had finally reached her destination. She wasn't running from the world anymore. She was running with it, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone in the stride. The ghosts were gone, the secrets were buried, and the path ahead was wide, open, and entirely theirs.
Thanks for following the story till the end. This story reminds us of how powerful love is, that it is one of the most amazing things we share as humans. Yet it comes with its difficulties and it comes with its challenges. But these challenges are surmountable when the two people involved are willing to work together and face whatever stands before them. I hope you have found this very enjoyable, and this is one of the things I love to do, to help us see love from another angle, unlike the conventional stories that we see where it has to be this way or that. Our stories draw your attention to the fact that there are so many areas of love that are unexplored, and I hope that you have found something very helpful from this. I would appreciate if you would follow us and subscribe to this channel. That is one way you encourage us and help our channel to grow and reach out to more people. Thank you very much, and see you in the next one. Stay enchanted.